ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music, and more.
Going somewhere? If you're getting out and about soon, pack a podcast that will take you on a real journey. Binge all seasons of ABC's Expanse podcast. There's spies, survival, grand heists, and supernatural sightings. These are the stories of Australia you probably haven't heard, but won't be able to stop talking about once you do. All 4 seasons are available now. Just search Expanse on the ABC Listen app.
A big concern since Donald Trump returned to the White House has revolved around what's thought to be his authoritarian style and what it means for the future of US democracy. The US president is a convicted criminal. He defies court rulings, deports immigrants without due process, denies media organisations access to events, and has little to no regard for Congress. So, when he says he wants to run for another term as president, which is banned under the US Constitution, it's not just seen as a flippant comment. Today, Philip Klinkner, a professor of government at Hamilton College in Clinton, New York, on how Trump could actually do it. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Philip, Donald Trump, he says a lot of things, and let's face it, it's really hard to know sometimes if he's being serious or not. But recently he did make a comment that he was not joking about remaining as president for a 3rd term.
Well, for a long time, really over a year now, he's been talking about running for a 3rd term, but he always qualified it by saying that he was joking.
It will be the greatest honor of my life to serve not once, but twice, or 3 times, or 4 times.
We go to 20. We go to 24. Did you see it? Then it says 28, 32, 36, 40, 44.
I've raised a lot of money for the next race that I assume I can't use for myself, but I'm not 100% sure because I don't know. I think I'm not allowed to run again. I'm not sure.
We may have to go for an extra term. Oh, they're going crazy. They're going crazy. Tomorrow you're going to see headlines. Trump wants an extra term. I told you. He's a dictator. We told you. No. I'm only kidding.
Now, in this case, he was doing an interview and he said, no, I'm not joking. I'm actually seriously considering possibly serving for a 3rd term. And he even laid out a potential scenario where he would possibly attempt to do that. So I think it's something that Americans, people around the world, need to take seriously, that Donald Trump really does want to stick around longer than he should be able to, based on the Constitution.
Yeah, because the US president cannot serve more than 2 terms, which is unlike here in Australia where there really is no limit on how long a Prime Minister can stay in office. So just remind me of the law in the United States.
There's an amendment to the Constitution that says that the president can only be elected to 2 terms. The clear intent of this was to limit presidents to 2 terms, 8 years in office total. But the language is a little vague. And Trump is holding out the possibility that he's going to use that vague language to try and keep himself in power beyond this 2-term limit. Even though, like I said, the clear intent of this amendment was to limit presidents to 8 years. And for him to sort of get around it really shows that he has a sort of desire to remain in power beyond any sort of legal constraints.
I'll get you to explain that vague language a bit more in a moment, but just tell me, how did this law come to be? Why was it put in place in the first place?
Well, it wasn't originally in the Constitution, and there was just an informal sort of norm among presidents that you only serve 2 terms. And that really began with the first president of the United States, George Washington, who could have easily been elected to a third term, but he said, no, 2 terms is enough. I think this is something that we should keep. And sort of that principle guided all further presidents up until the middle of the 20th century, when Franklin Roosevelt decided to run for a third term and was elected, and then ran and was elected for a 4th term. In response to that, Congress then passed and the states ratified an amendment to the Constitution, which said that you couldn't be elected to more than 2 terms in office.
All right. So the concern was that one person, the president, could hold on to power for just far too long.
Yeah, exactly. And even though Roosevelt won, a 3rd and a 4th term, people saw that as kind of an exceptional circumstance, given that it took place in the context of World War II. And there was bipartisan majorities to say, no, 8 years is enough. We really don't want to have to sort of deal with this again.
All right, so let's turn to how President Trump then could go about seeking a 3rd or even a 4th term, given that this law is embedded in the United States Constitution. So tell me about this vague language again and what he could do with that.
Well, it says that no president shall be elected to more than 2 terms or be elected more than twice into office of the president. It doesn't say anything about becoming president by some means other than election. And the most common sort of way possibly around this is that if you were the vice president, you could then become president, not by being elected in your own right, but by succeeding to office if the president was to die or resign. And then basically you could be in any position in the line of succession to the president. And if the people ahead of you got out of the way one way or another, then you could become president, albeit not by being elected. So again, it clearly sort of violates the spirit by sort of torturing the language around elected and becoming president that way. And so the idea is that instead of having a Trump-Vance ticket like we had in 2024, we'd have a Vance-Trump ticket in 2028.
Wow.
And then Vance would just resign as president, and Trump would then become president, albeit not by being elected.
Oh my gosh, that's wild. So, but that would require J.D. Vance agreeing to this deal, of course, that, Trump would actually become the president again.
Well, J.D. Vance seems amenable to agreeing to pretty much anything Donald Trump wants. So I'm not sure that's that much of an impediment. Now, it does in the Constitution, in a different part of the Constitution, state that no one shall become vice president who is ineligible to become president. And that might bar this sort of Vance-Trump swap that I talked about. But that would require the U.S. Supreme Court to weigh in on this. This is all completely unknown territory in terms of constitutional law, and it's just unclear whether or not this Supreme Court would actually try to limit Donald Trump in that way.
And Phil, there's another option, isn't there, where Trump theoretically could influence the presidency without actually being the president through a family member.
Yeah, you could do that, or he's just an unpaid advisor to the president, but he would make all the important decisions. I mean, it's clear that we know this about Donald Trump, that even if he decides not to run in 2028, that he's not going to go back to Mar-a-Lago to spend time with his grandchildren and devote himself to charitable works. This is somebody who thrives on the attention, the adulation, the exercise of power. So that even if Trump is not formally in office, he's going to be attempting to wield political influence as long as he draws a breath.
I gather changing the Constitution would be another option, although rather difficult.
That is almost impossible. It's been many years since we've actually amended the Constitution, and it requires supermajorities in both Congress and in the states. And right now, Republicans, even if they're inclined to make that change, just don't have the seats in Congress for that to be able to happen. But it's really important to state this, that this is all very much outside of the intent of the Constitution. And this is really a demonstration of the fact that Donald Trump wants to exercise power and doesn't want to be constrained by law, the Constitution, political norms. So in that sense, it's a very, very dangerous development in our politics.
Yeah, not to mention that this is the sort of stuff you'd find in a dictatorship. And we've seen it, of course, in the case of Vladimir Putin in Russia. He actually amended the Russian constitution to allow him to remain president for basically the rest of his life.
Yeah, exactly. But before that, before they amended the Constitution, he did what was called the tandemocracy, where he had one of his cronies, Viktor Medvedev, become the president, and then he was just serving as the prime minister. But it was a way for Putin to exercise power, to stay in power, and still be within the kind of formal restrictions of the Russian Constitution. But nonetheless, it was clear that Putin was calling all the shots.
All right. So, Phil, surprisingly, there are a number of ways that Donald Trump could extend his power beyond his second term. I guess the question is whether or not he would actually try to do that, and we don't really know the answer. But from what you've been saying, it's even dangerous to talk about this.
Right. Well, we know from our history with Donald Trump that laws and normal sort of political expectations are no constraint on him. In 2021, he tried to organize an insurrection in order to maintain himself in power, despite the results of the election. And this is just another example of his unwillingness to be constrained by the laws, by the Constitution, by political norms. Somebody who was going to try and overturn the results of the election in 2020, I don't think can be trusted to abide by what the Constitution says in 2028.
Yeah, but if he tries to find a way to stay in the White House, would the American people really stand for that?
There are so many things we don't know between now and then.
Yeah.
How popular would he be? And the other thing is, if he's willing to do this, what else would he be willing to do in order to subvert an election? So again, it's just another example of many of Donald Trump where he's a danger to democracy.
Yeah, so if he did go down this path then, Phil, how would he be stopped?
That's a good question. It's not clear. Perhaps the Supreme Court would try and stop him, but would he actually go along with what the Supreme Court says? Would the electorate stop him? Would he attempt to sort of do whatever he could as president to subvert the election? Would he even hold an election? Sadly, these are questions that we have to start asking ourselves now if we're worried about democracy in America.
So what do you think then? Do you think Donald Trump would really try this on?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think it depends on what the sort of politics of the moment are, how popular he thinks he is. I think that if he thought he would lose, he would not run. I don't think his ego can handle losing. But again, I think there are many ways in which he would attempt to subvert democracy. This is just one of them. And we're going to have to sort of go through many of these things over the next 3 to 4 years.
Philip Klinkner is a professor of government at Hamilton College in Clinton, New York State. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed, audio production by Adair Shepherd and Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. ABC News Daily will be taking a long weekend for Easter and we'll be back again on Tuesday. Thanks for listening.